Today I'm going to tell you about a fairly old and fairly obscure game called The Sorceress Cave that was published in 1978. And in my next video I'm going to review the sequel by the same designer called The Mystic Wood from 1980. Now, why playing and reviewing games this old and not this well known? For cultural and historical reasons mainly. I've always been fascinated by the narrative element in board games. Not all board games. I'm not a narratologist in the sense that I believe that board games are narratives. To me, that statement is absurd because there are a lot of games that have no narrative element whatsoever, but some do. And I'm interested in looking at those that obviously do have a narrative element, do construct a story, and I'm curious about the way they do it. I'm studying the way games with a narrative element do tell a story and do create a narrative experience for the players. And I'm hoping then to put together my ideas, the notes I'm writing down, and put them together in a book at some point. So I started looking at Dungeons and Dragons mainly because to me that is a case where we do not have any doubt we can identify a game that is narrative, that is a perfect hybrid between narration, storytelling, and a game. And of course, that is not a board game. Actually, it emerged from board games. It detached itself. It's well known that Dungeons and Dragons started in wargaming circles when wargamers started innovating on classical wargame style and added new ideas such as individual characters instead of controlling large numbers of people, unique objectives, increasing degrees of freedom, moving towards the idea that you can attempt whatever you want in a role-playing game, and then later adding the fantasy scenario, and that's how Dungeons and Dragons was created, published in 1974, the first role-playing game that started the role-playing game craze and also the fantasy craze. Fantasy wasn't nearly as big of a genre before D&D. So, it's clear Dungeons and Dragons departed from board gaming. What fascinates me, though, as I started looking at board games in the late 70s, is that as soon as D&D came out with that idea of having strong narrative experiences through gaming, then board game designers seem to be inspired by that and started borrowing elements from role-playing and insert them into board games. You have, starting from the 70s, games usually with fantasy elements, which is to be expected given the inspiration from D&D, where players play individual heroes with specific missions, with a lot of similarities for role-playing games, with customization that you didn't see before, and simply with themes and elements that seem to be intended to capture the experience of a role-playing game through board gaming. One such game is the Sorceress Cave. Now, in the instructions, rulebook, and designer's note, there is no reference of D&D, which is to be expected given copyright troubles that the designer may have feared if he acknowledged the affiliation of the game from Dungeons and Dragons. Later, however, in 1980, the designer, Terence Donnelly, wrote a memoir published in the Games and Puzzles magazine, and you can find the article online in Board Game Geek on the page for this game in the file section. He wrote the memoir which just said, yes, I designed the game because I liked D&D, but I couldn't play because I didn't like the idea of having to look for a dungeon master, which you couldn't always have, and I didn't like the idea that you had to prepare so much before the game. The Dungeon Master had to do a lot of work preparing the scenario. Not many scenarios and adventures and modules were available in 1978. So the designer, as he acknowledged later, wanted to have a game based on D&D that was easy to play and you could play out of the box without having to worry about too much stuff. The Sorceress Cave was the result. So, if nothing else, to me, this is a game that is interesting in a possible story of narrative board games, or board games with strong narrative elements. There will be many trends that emerge in this family of games, and in future reviews I'll keep sharing my ideas as I investigate this type of games. But one trend is games inspired by D&D, trying to bring back the role-playing game and turn it into a board game again. which of course is what role-playing game used to be before it matured into a board game. So Sorceress Cave, a narrative board game, D&D in a box. Let's see how the game does that, how it tries to be a board game role-playing game. At the beginning of the game, each player selects a party of hero from a roster of available ones. As you can see, there are different types of heroes, from hero, woman, human hero, ogre, troll, etc. And they have a selection value. At the beginning, each player selects a party with a total selection value of 6. And you take from this deck the cards that form your party. In this case, for example, suppose I want to play with a priest and 2 dwarves. When I have characters in my party, I ignore this section here about hostile, indifferent, friendly, and I only look at this section here that tells me the fighting value, which is 1 for the dwarf. And in case of magic users, the fighting value may be divided into fighting strength proper and magical powers. You can see the two of them add up to the total fighting value. If I am using the priest in melee, then he can use both of the values, so I will have a total combat value of 4. If I'm using it to attack the opponent at a range, so at a distance, then he's casting a spell, he's only using the magic power, so when he's casting a spell attacking at a distance, he only has a power of 2. So I have my party of heroes, then I choose a pawn that will indicate the position of my party in the dungeon, and I start the game by putting this tile in the middle of the table. That is the gateway. We are now entering the dungeon. Before you start the game, you should also decide what the heck it is that you're doing in the dungeon. There are several suggested scenarios that you can play, several objectives. Maybe you're going down to hunt for a specific monster, specific villain, such as the Sorcerer, who created the dungeon in the first place, in which case you base the victory conditions on that. Quite interesting. Look what the rules say about the object of the game. Play ends when all parties which are able to do so have left the cave. Actually, that was the fact I wanted to point out to you is that on. Players form exploring parties and by turns explore the cave area by area until the large pack of cards is exhausted. So until you have explored all the tiles that form the dungeon, or no one cares to go further. That's a very vague victory condition, very vague end game condition. It shows you how the game has a sort of sandbox component. You can simply go down, have fun, slay a couple of monsters, grab some treasure, and go out. Will that allow you to level up your characters and improve them over time? No, there is no campaign system. You just have the satisfaction of say, well, I stole some silver and I killed some monsters. Or you can then score your points based on how much stuff you got, how many monsters you eliminated, and then simply you try to beat that next time. Or if you're playing competitive, you're playing solitaire. If you're playing competitive, then you can see which party did best in the dungeon. Anyways, it is time now to start exploring the dungeon. When it is your turn, you can move from the tile in which you are to the next one. To move to the next one, you move your pawn close to the exit of the tile that you want to enter, and then you draw a tile from there. You see these tiles have a little arrow there. It is simply used as an indication to keep tiles consistent. So in this game, for example, I want to use the arrows pointing all in that direction. I guess there would be nothing against having all the tiles pointing in that direction. So I simply add the tile there, and I entered the room. Now this is a chamber, so there will be an event happening. It could have been that I was just entering a corridor, in which case nothing would have happened. I would simply move into it. There are no encounters in corridors. There are also special events, special rooms with special instructions, such as this one. You can read the instructions. A really neat little thing that may happen here. But in standard chambers, such as this one or this one, which are simply empty area, you draw a card from there for each level of the dungeon. So if I'm level 1, like here, I draw a single card, level 2, 2 cards, and so on and so forth. Some of these cards will have staircases, such as this one, that will lead me downstairs to the next level. And when I am a level 2, I may find new stairs that will bring me down to level 3, level 4, and maybe there'll be staircases that will also allow me to go up in another section, say another section of level 2 from level 3, which is the type of complicated, convoluted dungeon that you would expect from a game inspired by Dungeons and Dragons in the 70s. That was the kind of dungeon that you would expect. Complicated, a real maze full of monsters and without too much of an objective of a sophistication about it. It is about going there, slaying monsters, and gaining treasure. So how about the cards that you encounter? As I said, for each level in which you are, oh, what a nice beginning. For each level in which you are, you draw a card for the room in which you are. Level 1, a card. Level 2, 2 cards, and so on and so forth. Some of these cards represent monsters. Some represent special encounters, some represent treasure. If you only found treasure, good for you, you can grab it. If you found monsters, you have to interact with them. If you found monster and treasures, then you have to interact with them before you can grab the treasure. So suppose that we found a monster and now we have to interact with the monster. Now, as you can see, many monsters have a little area in the middle with numbers from 1 to 6 and possible reactions. The enemy may be hostile, indifferent, or friendly. You may choose to attack the enemy entirely without even trying to be amiable, in which case you get initiative, I think, in the game. It is called like the advantage of surprise. In most of the games these days we call it initiative. So you can attack it immediately, you can attack the enemy, or you may choose to try to negotiate, make a deal, be friendly, in which case you roll a die and you consult this table. If the enemy is hostile, then they attack you and they have the advantage of surprise, they have the initiative. They may be indifferent, in which case nothing happens, you can leave the room, or they may be friendly, in which case they join your party. My party that has just been covered with event cards. So suppose that I was lucky and the card that I had, there was a troll, has joined us. Now I actually picked up an ogre. I rolled for the rogue. Suppose actually the rogue has joined us. The rogue was friendly. So that simply becomes one of my characters. This is important because the roster of the party may change quite dramatically because characters may die easily. How would that happen? Well, that happens if you do have to resolve combat. When you have combat, basically you split combat, which may be against multiple opponents, into small fights, into duels, or in any case, fights of one character against one other character, or one of your characters against two of them. If it's two of them against one of you, then it's bad, but that's how it works. It's always one character versus a single character, or 1 versus 2. The only exception is when you have range attacks, in which case you may have some of your enemies attack, some of your people attacking the opponent, and you may keep the magic users that has a range attack in the background, in which case the magic user contributes to the fight, but only using the magic power, not the total strength. The advantage is that in this case the magic user cannot be killed, cannot be hurt. How does it work? Super simple. You roll a die for yourself and a die for the opponent. You add all of the total combat factors, so that number there, in which case I will add 2 from the 2 dwarves. This guy is contributing a total of 4. Maybe I have other upgrades, I have weapons, magic things that give me other advantages. It may be that I have the advantage of surprise, in which case also add a +1. Once I've added everything, I roll a die for the opponent, I add their combat strength, they may have the advantage, they may have initiative, there may be other conditions. I compare the two, and whoever scored the highest result wins the fight. Takes a hit. Each hit is fatal in this game. So if they score the higher result, one of my people that are involved in the fight dies. Boom. As simple, quick, and brutal as that. On the other hand, if they take a hit, they're dead. And if my party took a hit, then I need to rearrange things around. Maybe I decide now to send that guy to the fry, and I keep fighting like that. I may try to retreat, in which case I have to leave the room. I cannot pick up stuff, and if somebody was killed, they lost in the room, whatever it is that they were carrying. This is the general idea. This is how combat works. And most other game effects are self-explanatory, meaning there are instructions on the card telling you what the card does. That applies to magic items, magic effects, magic weapons, other things, special things that enemies can do. But this is the general idea. You move down the dungeon, you interact with the environment, pick up treasure, gain the advantages, try to move past traps, fight against a lot of enemies, and you will see some of your people die, most likely, but also you get a chance of recruiting people and changing the roster of your party. Continue like this, moving around, exploring. There are a lot of tiles to go through. Continue moving around, continue exploring until you complete the mission, until the victory conditions of the scenario that you are playing are fulfilled. Now, by today's standards, the game is very rudimentary, but if you look at it a little closer, you can see the skeleton, you see the same bone structure of recent well-respected games, such as the game, guess what? The D&D board games, such as Wrath of Ashardalon, Castle Ravenloft, Legend of Drizzt, Temple of Elemental Evil, that are, at the core, draw a tile, move on it, encounter monsters, encounter other stuff, encounter traps, stuff like that, resolve, fight in very simple ways, and move on. Draw a tile, resolve an encounter, draw a tile, resolve an encounter. The bare bones were really here. I mean, Wrath of Ashardalon is nothing but this game with more details, more customization, more bookkeeping, but that also gives you more nuances and a campaign system. All these things were missing here. So, if nothing else, here you see some ideas that, well, still feel underdeveloped, but by the standards of 78 were probably pretty cool. By now, they still they look pretty unpolished and lacking and outdated, but historically, we need to acknowledge our ancestors and progenitors. We have to say this is a game that back then had some merit, and therefore it's an interesting attempt to capture D&D in a box with the advantage of a board game. You take it out of the box, you don't have to prepare anything beforehand. You can play all together or competitive between teams. You do not have to be 4 people versus against one, the Dungeon Master, or 4 people working with Dungeon Master. Dungeon Master doesn't really play. One of the advantages of board gaming is that everybody's playing in the same way, either the same team or not, but still on a peer level. So you have the advantages of board gaming, and of course the limitations of board gaming, that you do not have the freedom and the thematic depth and the strong sense of immersion in an imaginary world like you have in role-playing games. So plus and minuses, but as an attempt to give you a Dungeons & Dragons type board game, this is one that is deserves some respect. Again, in its historical context. If you find a copy online, is it worth buying it? If you wanted, again, to have a collection that has a little bit as a completist element, you want to have fantasy games, you want to have dungeon crawls, this is an important, I think, step in that direction. For mere entertainment value, can this still be played and enjoyed? Not much, because there's so many better options. But, for example, to introduce a child, to introduce a young gamer to the idea of role-playing game or dungeon delving, actually this could be a good one. This could be the first game that of this type that I introduced my daughters to, who are now 3 and 5, but almost 4 and 6. On the other hand, when you're playing with children, I believe that there could be a problem, that is, characters die so easily in this game. And this is really one of the limitations of the game, when the game misses doing something that's important in role-playing game, which is to create an emotional bond between the character and the player. Here you should better not get attached to your characters. it is hard to start with because you're controlling a full party, not a single individual. Of course, you could have 4 players controlling 4 characters, for example, but then your card is gonna die, and all of a sudden you're controlling a giant who is there for a while, and then the giant dies, and a troll joins the party. So this constantly changing roster has the problem there of preventing the game from feeling very immersive. It is also incredibly, enormously luck based. You may have 2 lucky rolls at the beginning, so a hero and a giant join your party. Then the rest of the dungeon is gonna be pretty much a walk in the park, because your party, you still have your initial heroes, is going to be so strong. You just don't have much to fear at that point. Chances are you'll get some other allies down the road. So it can be incredibly easy or incredibly tough, incredibly punishing. It is very, very luck based. You may find an item here and there, and if you find it, that is not really a matter of choice, because you have a good item, darn, use it, you know. There aren't many tactical choices based on that. The only tactical choice really is whether to keep the magic users in the second line or the first line, and also whether to attack to start with or to try to negotiate with a new encounter. But then, depending on how likely the character is to be friendly to you, that also is a pretty much simple choice. So that's a no-brainer, but it has the advantage of being something that is very casual, very simple, can be played with young gamers, non-gamers. See it mainly, again, as an artifact of its own time, and it's a very simple introductory game as such as a game. There are just many better options today, but still, I like games, I like history of games, so I was happy to play the game because I learned about the game itself, I learned about the gaming environment of the time. So to me, the time wasn't wasted, and who knows, maybe one day we'll decide to take it out and play it. And played more, introduce some new gamers, especially young ones, to the idea of dungeon delving. Sorceress Cave, 1978. Old and not so good by today's standards.